Good evening and welcome to the Press Club with me, Kendall Burton, and my co-host, Mr. Earl Buske, where we review the big stories making news every week, locally, regionally, internationally, and we review the newspapers of the day. In this case, the Star newspaper, expect the unexpected in the silly season. Clash of the Titans, a reference to an exchange between Rick Wayne and Claudius Francis, pictured on the top of the Star. Also, Jafali's ex-wife fingers St. Lucia Prime Minister. The Voice newspaper, search for top cop to be blocked. I guess that's what you call a cop block. And the Mirror newspaper, the SLP government under pressure. UWP continues to criticize SLP government's blunders. Where do we start? The Jafali ex-wife story. Yeah. Well, that story was aired on HTS this week. They broke the story in an exclusive interview with the Prime Minister. That story is carried on page 8 of the Star. Jafali's ex-wife names the PM in legal action stemming from the divorce case over in the UK. And I guess, as we've heard by now, the Saudi billionaire Wali Jafali is not doing well. He's suffering from cancer. And the wife is trying to expedite divorce proceedings in that case to get access or to gain her portion of several properties listed in the Star article, including a £50 million house that was a former church converted to a home. There's another $2.5 million property that was acquired in 2007. Basically, her argument is that her husband's diplomatic appointment was invalid, that it was, what was the word I'm looking for? It was not valid, that he used the appointment to the IMO to basically block her access to his funds and his property. So the Prime Minister and the AG, the Attorney General, have been named in this legal action that's supposed to be heard, I believe, if my memory serves me correct, in June this year. Yeah. Your reaction?
It's expected. I'm not surprised because Mr. Jafali's wife did indicate at the end of the case, I don't know if you want to call it a case, the hearing that gave her the right to file a case in London. At the end of that, one of the things she said to the press, which wasn't widely reported here, but was certainly reported in Europe, is she has decided that having secured that victory in the preliminary round, that what she's going to do is to use that to begin to promote a movement to have the United Nations revisit the Vienna Convention, Article 31, because as far as she's concerned, the British law spits, not the law, the ruling of the British judge flies in the face of the convention, and that the convention will allow for diplomats to abuse their positions. The governments of St. Lucia's position then and now continues to be is that on a matter of strict legal interpretation, Mr. Jafali has done nothing wrong, has not committed a crime, has not broken any law, and insofar as the attempt by Mr. Jafali's ex-wife to challenge the right of the government of St. Lucia to decide who it will appoint as a diplomat and where and when and under what circumstances is precisely what the government of St. Lucia has been saying should not be a case. The precedent has now been established in British law by the ruling. If the appeal does not stand, because it's being appealed, if that appeal does not stand and the ruling stands, it would mean that, for example, if the French ambassador, if St. Lucia wants to get back at the French ambassador for having announced a boycott of the parade, irrespective of what his explanation is, if that ruling stands, it means that St. Lucia can now look for some way to render the French ambassador unacceptable and therefore maybe question his behavior and his activity. In other words, the Vienna Convention and the United Nations prescribe precisely for that purpose, is that governments should not have say, and courts should not have a say in the sovereign exercise of its sovereign right by a government. And as the Prime Minister says, it's a matter of law. As he pointed out, he loves a legal battle as well. And one doesn't have to be a lawyer to watch the facts, and if we can interpret them as, you know, from a standpoint of common and natural law, then no country, no institution beyond your borders ought to have the right to question the sovereignty of a government. A government can punish you for what you did, but it cannot come and tell you who to appoint. And what she is seeking for the court to sell St. Lucia, right, that its appointment of Dr. Jufali was wrong. And the government of, I doubt she'll win the case, but let's see how it goes.
In that sense, I agree, because as you pointed out, as the government has pointed out, this is a personal matter that has now taken on legs.
Tentacles.
You know, but she has a valid point to the point, or to the extent where I agree with her in terms of the need for the Vienna Convention to perhaps be reviewed, as we discussed previously when I had a copy here. And in light of the discussion on the rights of the child issue, as the National Security Minister pointed out, times have changed, you know, and these conventions need to reflect that reality. The Vienna Convention in this case was written, I think, in 1961. Am I correct? 1961, and there have been several cases of, you know, abuse of diplomatic positions and that sort of thing. But again, for her to use that for what I would interpret to be a cover or an excuse, you know, for her actions, I have an issue with that. You know, but as far as the need for the change, I agree up to that point. I agree with the government in terms of its stance from a purely legal perspective. That can be argued. You know, and I don't think, you know, you can dictate, irrespective of whether or not he did or didn't dictate to, as you said, a sovereign government who should be appointed. But the fact remains, and the big question that's being asked is, where do we stand now? How do we recover from what seems to be this the fallout of this situation? We have heard that the Prime Minister said, and not the Attorney General, the Governor General, pointed out in his speech that Walid Jafari had agreed to support diabetic research here in St. Lucia. We've heard legislative changes being made to accommodate that, you know, but in terms of seeing concrete products and fruit of that relationship with Walid Jafari, we are yet to see it. And we hear that for the same reason his wife is pursuing this and asking for the court to expedite the process, that he's not doing well. If he expires, what security do we have to fall back on? Well,
both St. Lucia and herself have irons in the fire insofar as his longevity. If we are to believe what she told the court in London, then he doesn't have long to live. But if we are also to take into consideration how long appeals take to be heard, then it's going to be a long time. And if the case is all the way in June, and he is as sick as she claims that he's about to expire. So like I said last week, my position in all of this, I avoid predicting the legal outcome of cases. I avoid now trying to knock into people's heads things that they obviously don't want to see or hear, insofar as all of the interpretations of every major issue, as you will know, is politically colored in the main. And therefore, my main concern, like I said last week, is that, and I'll say it again, if I were to advise the Prime Minister, I would say to him, go as far as asking Dr. Jufali to ensure that he puts in his will the delivery of that diabetic center. Because at the end of the day, we're getting a lot of bad press. Nothing is changing. You know, the government isn't about to fire Dr. Jafari. The UWP said they would fire him within 100 days, you know, of winning the next general election. Again, will he be there? Will we have our diabetic center by then? My emphasis right now has to be that we do all we can, if that hasn't been done, to ensure that the diabetic center is delivered. And perhaps that would be what I would want to hear about. Next.
The other story in the Star.
I mean, that is what I'd like to hear about next, not next story.
Yeah, but I don't want to spend too much time on the Jafari affair. I think we've exhausted our discussion.
She fingered the Prime Minister.
You know,
right?
And yeah. So I guess we wait till the court date to hear and to see how it evolves. The expect the unexpected in the silly season, the Clash of the Titans. Reference to a story on page 17. My clash with the third most powerful man in St. Lucia.
MP3?
Did you watch the talk show on Thursday?
No, unfortunately. I'm on air at that time with my own show.
Yeah, you have a lot of shows.
Yeah, I do.
In that episode or edition of the show, he spoke about the arrival here last week. That's also the subject of the center page in the Star. Going cheap, 100% Lucian passports. He referenced the fact that on Saturday, and there's a picture of a jet here that landed allegedly at George F.L. Charles. Gilbert Chiguri's private jet, photographed shortly after it touched down at GFL Charles last Saturday. In that story, he claims that a number of persons accompanying Gilbert Chiguri into St. Lucia had St. Lucian passports. And the question he's asking is, if the CIP, the Citizenship by Investment Program, was only launched in January this year, how do you account for these persons having St. Lucian passports? Under what circumstances were they given St. Lucian passports? By whom? The expiration dates on those passports, he claims, is 2018, an indication that they were acquired in 2013. And that was the subject of the exchange between himself and the President of the Senate, Claudius Francis, who also has his own talk show. So they had this discussion, or clash, as he puts it, clash with the Titans, over Chiguri's or his accomplices or his companions holding St. Lucian passports, and questioning who gave which passports and under what circumstances, under what conditions. And he goes on to quote extensively from the book Lapses and Felicities, this entire second section of the article. As a photo of Mr. Chiguri, he entered local affairs with help from a local archbishop and now bears the St. Lucia cross and 100% Lucian passport. You obviously didn't hear the show. Did you hear the exchange between the
I didn't.
gentlemen?
I've heard references to it.
But I have an issue with this debate, whether it was under 2013, who gave what to whom, whether it is the Chiguri passports, whether it is the impacts investigation with the UWP and the Voice newspaper, for instance, claiming that impacts had nothing to do with them. You know, I think we're getting bogged down in a lot of useless arguments over trivialities, whether or not the UWP or the SLP is to be. And the fact is, St. Lucia is faced now with a situation where the US government is refusing to support the local police in any form or fashion. Now you have the EU coming on board with questions about the government's handling of the impacts investigation and the overall justice system in St. Lucia, calling for the government, as they have said in the press conference, to have certain things done by March, a March deadline. March is around the corner, next week in fact. Do we really want to be bogged down in these sort of exchanges, you know, and this close to an election, where people are looking for, because the fact is, the United States government is dealing with the St. Lucia government, irrespective of which party is in power. The fact is, we voted the UWP out, we put the SLP in power. The SLP now has responsibility for managing the affairs of the government of the island of St. Lucia. And I'm not satisfied that the Prime Minister or the government is being as forthcoming as they should be in terms of answering the questions that are being asked and giving the UWP fodder, I think, you know, to attack them.
Well, invariably, this brings us to a point I wanted to raise again, and along the lines of the role of the media. At this point in time in St. Lucia, where we're approaching a crucial general election, one would expect that the media would remember that every election we also discuss the issue of what is the role of the media, but we tend to wait until it's too late, until the horses have bolted, you know, towards the finishing line, the candidates, etc. And when the exchanges start to take place and individual media persons get involved in an exchange, then the association as a collective sees its responsibility as expected to come out and defend and take the side of the media person against being attacked by a politician, irrespective of what side. And I'm saying that we have gone through so much of that kind of discussions, and we are seeing just what you have just mentioned. And I've been an old horse, you know, on the field, but I speak to younger persons in our profession, and they are as fed up as you in terms of the emphases that are being put in relation to the issues. However, we get bogged down into, if that's the headline over there, then we got to get in on the story. So in the news competition, the competition in the news business forces us to go around issues like flies that have been put up. Rick Wynn obviously has connections and contacts. His information on how when Mr. Shagori was going to arrive, his ability to get a picture of his jet landing, his ability to get the information that is in the passports of the people who arrived on that jet, you know, it's not trivial. It indicates that he has connections. What you and I know Rick does too is that he chooses what information he puts out and what information he holds back. So one always has to weigh what Rick says against what he doesn't say and what he's holding back, so that his emphasis on Shagori has been the same. You know, from the first time Shagori came, he always recalls in his latest, I'm sure he did it in his latest plug for Lapses and Infelicities, his book, his favorite picture of Mr. Shagori landing here the first time the jet came in. And on the question of a passport, a Sanusian passport, its value today in the world and in the Caribbean, where passports are being sold, where every Vincentian, Dominican, Kititian, or Antiguan passport that is sold through these programs, that person automatically also becomes a CARICOM citizen and therefore a citizen of St. Lucia. You know, by virtue of the access, us having to recognize them as having equal rights as St. Lucia by virtue of having an Antiguan or a Dominican passport when they came, whether it is from China or from Canada. In that context, this new reality of today, I don't mind being Gilbert Shagori 2 passports for in return for what he has done to let the Pitons become a World Heritage Site. That was all at his cost.
Hold that thought. We're due for a break. We'll take the break, and when we come back, you can elaborate further on your point. This is the Press Club. We'll be right back after these messages.